I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that you all know keeps track of what President Trump is doing, especially in the context of the measures that he is taking that destroy our rights, our freedoms, and our well-being. Let me begin this episode of Trump Watch by acknowledging that I am not Nostradamus. Okay, I cannot predict the future. However, several weeks ago, I said that there is a very strong possibility that President Trump's going to start some kind of foreign war in order to distract attention away from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. As I'm sure all of you all know, that the Justice Department is steadfastly determined to keep secret the Jeffrey Epstein files after numerous officials had promised to release them, including President Trump himself. But somehow or another, everybody changed their mind. And so they're saying, no, let's move on, standard thing. Nothing to see here, folks. Got to keep them secret. And then Congress subpoenaed the records, and they turned over records that had already been public. Certainly at the same time keeping the secret ones still secret. And so, as James Madison pointed out, the thing about standing armies, which of course we have a national security state as of, at least the late 1940s, is that in order to quell revolts among the citizenry in the old Roman Empire, whenever people got dissatisfied with out of control spending or debt or inflation, the Roman emperors would start a foreign war. And the reason for that is that because then it gets everybody all riled up, rally behind the flag, sing the Star-Spangled Banner, do the Pledge of Allegiance, and support the president, support the troops, and thank them for their service. And I mean, it's a time-honored trick by which people can get distracted away from what they were rebelling against in order to temporarily rally around the flag, and now we're at war and so forth. And so they would start these wars in order to quell revolts without resorting to violence. And so, lo and behold, here is Trump moving thousands of troops into the Caribbean, next door to Venezuela. And my hunch is that those troops are not there to apprehend drug dealers that are trying to smuggle drugs off the coast of Venezuela. I would not be surprised at all if we see an invasion taking place here, a regime change invasion. And that way, I guarantee you, every conservative in this land will immediately hop to, click his heels, salute, and say, we've got to support the president. We're at war now. And there would be widespread acclamations and celebrations of, the troops winning glorious victories and so forth. Why else move all these warships into the Caribbean? I mean, you need that many warships to try to find some boats that are smuggling drugs? I don't think so. Especially because once the drug dealers see all those warships are there, they'll just go elsewhere to as a way to smuggle their drugs. And then thousands of troops. So my hunch is that Trump is first going to do an ultimatum and tell the dictator there in Venezuela, abdicate, and you'll get safe passage to some country that'll let you live there, and just vacate. And if you don't, we invade. And of course, there's precedent for this. There's Manuel Noriega in Panama. Remember that invasion that killed, I don't know how many people there, innocent people, and they captured Noriega, brought him back to the United States, tried him as a drug dealer, put him away in jail for umpteen years. And I can easily see them doing this. And Trump's not a dumb guy. He's a very smart guy. I mean, this is the perfect area in which to do a regime change invasion, because this guy's a socialist, Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela. He's an illegitimate president. Everybody acknowledges he lost the last presidential election, and he's suppressing dissent in the country. Protesters get shot, they get incarcerated. they're a national security state too, just like the United States is, and he's got the national security state loyal to him, just like Trump has the U.S. national security state loyal to him, especially after he fired a bunch of generals and put in his loyal generals. So they do whatever Maduro says, just like the U.S. national security state does whatever Trump says. And so if Trump says invade, they're going to invade. And now the interesting thing about Maduro is that I don't think there's going to be any sympathy for him. He recognizes the threat of an invasion here. So he's called up the militia, the civilian militia. He's calling on civilians to join the reserve forces, to man the posts at the beaches, and he's got the army on high alert, and he's expecting an invasion, and the guy's smart to expect an invasion, because I think we may see this coming. But my hunch is it's going to be a fairly easy victory for Trump, because I don't think there's going to be any sympathy for Maduro inside Venezuela. The guy's turned the country into a basket case with his socialism, and then combined with U.S. sanctions. That's what caused this massive exodus of Venezuelans who were trying to flee violence from a lot of the drug war there induced by the U.S. government, the U.S. government's drug war that, of course, expands into Latin America, and then the Venezuelan immigrants coming into the United States trying to save their lives, only to be arrested, captured, and deported back to Venezuela, where they're facing certain death. So there's not going to be any sympathy nationwide toward Maduro, and my hunch is that his troops will immediately surrender. They know they don't stand a chance against the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army is the most powerful military force in history, and they don't stand a chance, especially with air superiority, bombing positions of Venezuelan troops. I mean, they'll be wiped out very quickly. So I think they're going to surrender very quickly. They're not going to sacrifice their lives for nothing, and certainly not for Maduro. So Maduro's goose is cooked if there's a regime change invasion. And so Trump will be hailed by the conservative movement as a great hero, that he saved the Venezuelan people. And it's just classic foreign interventionism. It's the foreign policy of the United States. That's why I always said, with Trump getting into power, nothing's going to change in a fundamental sense, because he's a foreign interventionist. And so he's going to be picking a target that's easy, where there's not going to be a whole lot of resistance. I'm sure there'll be some people killed, but Trump will say, well, it's all worth it. And the Venezuelan people will celebrate him, especially the dissidents who Maduro ousted. But, one of the downsides of this is that the U.S. government comes across as their daddy, that they couldn't do it themselves, the Venezuelan people. They couldn't get this guy ousted, so they turned to their daddy. And their daddy, of course, is Donald Trump. And so their daddy goes and effects a regime change invasion and succeeds in ousting Maduro from power. He'll be hailed as their daddy that saved them from this tyranny, and then democracy's restored, and hailed our daddy, or the worldwide interventionist emperor. So Trump is smart to select out Venezuela as his war, and in my opinion, what he's going to be doing is figuring out a way to distract away from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, and I think he'll succeed in that. I think the conservatives that are upset about Epstein will, in fact, rally around the flag, forget Epstein, and go on. And this is what Madison was saying that the old Roman Empire, the emperors would do. Now, let's see what else has been going on with Trump. We'll have to see what ends up happening there. But like I say, he's sending big warships down there, a large number, and thousands of troops. And notice something else, how he's conflating the war on drugs with the war on terrorism. Now, why does he do this? Well, because after the U.S. lost its official enemy that justified the whole Cold War, and in fact the conversion of the U.S. government from a limited government republic to a national security state, the big official enemy was Russia, the Soviet Union. I mean, this is what they used. It was a racket, great big racket. NATO, the whole thing. was in order to solidify the control of the U.S. national security state within the federal governmental system, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. And when they lost that in 1989, they were freaking out because people were talking about the peace dividend, that was going to downsize the military and so forth. Well, then the 9/11 attacks come and they're back to the races. Okay, now, terrorism has replaced communism as the big boogeyman. And so we're going to wipe out every terrorist in the world, and the terrorists are coming to get us. And so the whole war on terrorism became the whole justification for the national security state. And of course, people bought into it. I mean, the terrorists are coming, Jacob, the terrorists are coming. And wait a minute, I thought he was the communist. No, Jacob, you're living in the past. The Cold War's over. It's the terrorists now. You're the Muslims. And that was when there was a huge sacrifice of American liberty because people were so scared of the terrorists and the Muslims that they said, take away our freedom. We don't care. And that's how we got the Patriot Act, and that's how we got the illegal telecom spying and warrantless searches and the TSA at the airport. I mean, they're just massive sacrifice of whatever liberty Americans had left for the sake of security and safety and keeping us safe from the terrorists and so forth. But this is where the military comes in, you see, because they said that terrorism, even though it's a federal criminal offense, it's in the U.S. Code, we're going to make it an act of war. So they just decreed it. It's an act of war, so we can get the military involved in this. And so the military gets involved, and that's where the military demonstrated that it had the prerogative of taking American citizens into custody as accused terrorists, torturing them, indefinitely detaining them, assassinating them. Despite what the Fifth Amendment says about no assassinations, the war on terrorism, we're at war, Jacob, we're at war. The Constitution doesn't matter, we're in war. So the huge trading of liberty for security after 9/11. But the American presidents learned that, oh my gosh, all we got to do is declare somebody a terrorist and we've got it made. The courts are not going to second guess us. And the federal courts have made that very clear, that when it comes to foreign policy and the war on terrorism, they are never going to second guess the national security establishment. And as I've long contended, the national security establishment's who's running the show here. The other three branches always defer. Okay, if the Supreme Court even gets an inkling that the national security establishment's taking a certain position in a case, I will guarantee you they will not buck the national security establishment because that's the most powerful part of the federal government. That's what's really running the show. They let the other three branches have the veneer like they're in control, so everybody feels good that everything's okay. The Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, they don't care about veneers or appearances. They just care about power. And so, clearly, the drug offenses are a criminal offense. I mean, we all know that. People get indicted and prosecuted for drug offenses all the time. But then Trump here has said, we're going to conflate the drug war with the war on terrorism. And so he's declared these Venezuelan drug gangs as terrorists. Well, how easy is that? Oh, no, now we can have the military come in, Jacob, and we're just enforcing the drug war. And they've indicted or accused Maduro of being a drug dealer. And so now they can justify that by saying, we're using the military to capture a drug dealer. It's a nice little racket, but it's all about control. It's solidifying the control that the military intelligence establishment has over the American people. Okay? And it's always been about control. How do we maintain this control? How do we keep the serfs in their position as serfs? And one of the main ways is starting foreign wars and so forth. So the serfs say, we got to support the empire here. We got to support the empire, even though it solidifies their role as serfs. All right, on the terror front, old Trump's he's got his problems suddenly because a federal district court declared much of his tariff scheme unconstitutional. That Trump was relying on some statute, and as we all know, he was declaring national emergencies here and there and saying, I've got omnipotent powers, and when it comes to terrorists, I can willy-nilly do terrorists here and there. And the district court said no. But everybody thought, well, that's just a district court. And of course, the Trump administration appeals that, a federal court of appeals, which is not just tiddlywinks here. We're talking about a federal court of appeals of 11 judges in a 7-4 ruling declared much of his tariff regime unconstitutional. Okay, that means it violates the Constitution. Now they said, well, we'll leave it in place till October to give the government a chance to appeal, which to me is really weird. I mean, if something's unconstitutional, that makes it illegal. And if it's illegal, then it shouldn't stand for a minute. And for a court to say, well, it's illegal, but we're going to let it continue on till October is, to me, really weird. Seems to me if it's illegal, you stop it. You declare it stopped. And then the government can appeal if it wants to. And the Supreme Court can decide whether to stay it or not. But for a court to say, we declare it illegal, but we're going to let it continue, is just really weird. But in any event, it clearly is unconstitutional. And to have a system where the president, when he wakes up, can say, tariff here, tariff there, tariff there, tariff everywhere, is just the even if it were legal, it'd be the epitome of dictatorship. I mean, that's what a dictator is, where he can just impose taxes. And that's what a tariff is. It's just a tax. It's a sales tax on something you buy overseas. And he's setting these taxes and on his own without going to Congress, because he says, well, Congress gave me the authority to declare a national emergency, and if I do that, I can do this. Well, Congress then had no business declaring, delegating its powers to the president. But here we live under this regime where the president can just say, it would be like the president saying, I'm going to raise income taxes here, 10% him, 30% over here, 50% over here. It's amazing. And that we live under the system. And the difference between a tariff, a sales tax, and an income tax is the tariff is regressive. It hurts the poor and the lower middle class, and to a certain extent the middle class. We can see that already happening. People are really tightening up their belts. They realize that they're hurting big time because they're now having to pay this extra tax. And it's difficult for them to know how much of the increase in the price of something is the tariff. Amazon was going to disclose it, and Trump went after them with a vehemence and said, don't you even think about doing that. I don't want people to know how much of the increase in the price is from my tariffs. And sure enough, Amazon backed down and said, okay, Mr. President, much like other people have backed down, universities, big law firms. And you've got a president who is really in the right place at the right time in terms of the systems we have, that we've had for several decades. And as you all know, for a long time I've been saying Trump's not the problem here. The problem are the systems. But Trump, likes control. And he's setting the basis for massive control, his own personal control. But he's got the systems that are conducive to that, because the Americans have called these systems into existence. And the people who are now paying the price on the tariffs are people at the bottom of the economic ladder. They had this $800 exemption for a long time now, where if you bought something from overseas, it was less than $800, regardless of the tariff rate, that would come in tariff-free, essentially tax-free. And so, millions of Americans would buy something from China or wherever for less than $800 and no problem, a pair of tennis shoes or whatever. And businesses were thriving on this way, small mom and pop businesses and even large businesses buying things at less than $800. Well, Trump's removed that exemption entirely. And so now you've got businesses that are going under, can't afford the tariffs, or people are hurting hard because they can't buy cheap goods anymore overseas without paying that tariff. And so it's having an impact. But Trump is so obsessed with these tariffs and with control that when he did this the first time he was president, had this launched this big trade war against China, he was bankrupting American farmers who were very happy to be selling their crops into China. And China was very happy to buy the crops. And the trade war starts, and those farmers, a lot of them went bankrupt. And Trump said, "Oh, no problem. We'll put them on welfare." And he bailed them out with welfare, but a lot of them. But most people don't want to be on welfare. They'd rather be self-sufficient, producing and selling and independent of government control. But these farmers ended up on welfare. But so in any event, we'll see where this goes with the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. Clearly, Trump has to appeal. And one of the arguments they're making is, oh, this would be too complicated. We'd have to return all the tariff money. Well, so? Oh, but we've already spent it. Well, so? You shouldn't have done it in the first place. And if it's illegal, you got to compensate people for what you stole from them. But to use a practical argument to avoid a declaration that something is illegal, it's really weird to me. In the meantime, Trump has sent troops, as we know, into Los Angeles. He sent troops into L.A. And let me tell you something about troops. Whenever you travel overseas and you get off the plane and you go through customs and you enter the streets of the city that you have flown into, if you see troops in the streets, that's automatically how you know you're not in a free society, and you better be very careful, because troops in the streets always mean an unfree society. And notice that Trump, though, is very smart, cagey guy. Okay, he wants control, and he knows, just like every ruler in the world knows, and every ruler in history, is that you need a massive military intelligence establishment to do that, to carry out your will. I mean, this is why our founding fathers hated standing armies. They knew that presidents would use standing armies as a way to impose their will on the people. Because, as the founding fathers said, who can resist a massive standing army? The 82nd Airborne Division, a team of well-trained CIA assassins. I mean, yeah, I understand that Americans are well armed. There's, by and large, no serious gun control here in terms of confiscating people's weapons. But still, to take on the most powerful military in history, if it imposes a tyrannical regime here in the U.S., almost impossible. And that's why it was a huge mistake to get a national security state type of governmental system. I've said that for many, many years now. And Americans are going to realize, and now there's a lot of Americans, naive, that say, oh, this could never happen, Jacob. That's only Nazi Germany. It's a one-of-a-kind occurrence. Nazi Germany could never happen. There's no tyranny anymore, Jacob. Well, you look at other tyrannies. A prime example is Pinochet's regime in Chile. American conservatives love that regime. They still love the regime. Military rule, and rounding up people, torturing them, killing them, re-educating them, patriotism, it was all there. Innocent people, killing innocent people, torturing innocent people, raping innocent people, with the support of the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. Full support. They loved it because they said these people aren't really innocent. They're communists. They're socialists. Well, it's not a far cry from supporting a regime like that and then being excited about it and saying, we need the same kind of regime here. I mean, look at what they've done with Guantanamo Bay. Why did they put that torture center there at Guantanamo Bay? Well, because they didn't like the Constitution. They didn't want to operate under the Constitution or the control of the Supreme Court. That's why they put it there in Cuba, which is a remnant of the old, empire of the Spanish-American War. I mean, why does America even have a base in Cuba? Cuba doesn't have a base over here. Why on Cuba land have they carved out this base here, you see, that is converted into a torture center? So anybody that says that could not happen over here in the United States is naive to the extreme, because it happens, like at Guantanamo Bay. It happens in Chile with the full support of the national security establishment. And we could look at other regimes where it's happened. Iraq, where the regime changed there, and so forth. And so you've got Donald Trump, who's obsessed with control. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, the guy he wants control. Look at his attack on the Federal Reserve. The whole idea of the Federal Reserve is to have an independent body determining the quantity of money in society, because you don't want a president to just be expanding the money supply which of course result in more higher prices on top of the tariffs. You want those independent. Now, clearly, as a libertarian, I strongly oppose this whole system of a central bank and paper money, and so did our founding fathers. That was why America lived without a central bank and without paper money for more than 100 years. But Franklin Roosevelt comes in without any semblance of a constitutional amendment and changes the Constitution on his own, and declares the gold money and the silver money that was the official money of the country for more than 100 years illegal. He says, you got to turn in your gold or we're going to come after you with a felony indictment and conviction, incarceration, fine, confiscation. And so he turns the system into a paper money system, and we've seen the results. I mean, you can see the value of the dollar compared to what had been the official money, gold, decade after decade for 100 years or so. It's just a downward plunge. And but when they had this system, they go through this charade of saying, well, we want the central bank to be independent of the president, like a separation. And by and large, it has been. There's always been pressure from the president to get lower interest rates, which inflate the money supply, in other words. And they've got a $37 trillion debt and climbing under Trump. Trump's as big a spender as any other president, big borrower. He wants the Fed to be monetizing that debt just like every other president. That's my opinion on this whole attack on the Federal Reserve, trying to get Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, to lower interest rates, and now going after this woman, firing her, and looking for regulatory violations. I mean, there's another fascinating aspect to all this, is that we live in a highly regulated society. That's the administrative state. And those of you that have read Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged will be reminded about that part about how, I think there was a guy, a bureaucrat called Floyd Ferris, I think, that said, look, we're not interested in having all these rules and regulations so that people obey them. We have this whole regulatory system because we know people are going to disobey them. This way we have control over them. Whenever we want to go after somebody, we know we can find it. And that's what they've done with this woman. They've scoured through all the loan records. Now, how does the government have the loan records of the banks where this woman made loans and supposedly declared 2 residences as primary residence? Woo! Man, that's a grave regulatory offense. And, it's that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government agencies, guarantee, 50% of the home loans in America. So why are they doing that? So, but that's where the records are. So they scour them and looking for a regulatory violation, and they apparently found it. And so they're going after it, saying, "But we have reason to fire her." If they hadn't gotten her on that, they'd gotten her on income tax. I mean, any time they want, they can find an income tax violation. That's the value of control again. You have a big regulatory system, you got a tax system, and I'm not defending what this woman did. If she lied to the bank, she clearly shouldn't have, if that's what she did. But I'm saying that it looks to me like they look for an excuse, because from what I understand, there's a lot of people that have done this that they're not going after. So it's quite selective. And so it's arbitrary weaponization of the judicial process if they end up going after her, indict her or whatever, which they haven't done so far. They've just removed her from her post. But the whole point is that control. Trump wants control. And so you've got troops in L.A., troops in Washington. He's threatening to send troops into Chicago and using immigration, which is popular because everybody's scared of the so-called invaders coming to get them. He's been very successful in that sense. And then law and order. You see, law and order is always popular. Hitler used the whole war on terrorism there, and the war on communism too. Communism was the big boogeyman there too, just like it was during the Cold War here. And Hitler acquired these emergency powers. That's what they were, emergency powers. That's what the Enabling Act was all about. And presidents and rulers all around the world have learned that from that regime, saying, "Oh, well, God, this is a great way to acquire power." And so, because you establish law and order, and you use the troops to do this, so you get troops in big cities all across America establishing law and order, and everybody's cheering, just like the Germans did, cheering. Oh, we've got law and order here, and we've got the Gestapo picking up people on the side of the street and carting them away in unmarked cars and so ununiformed cops and so forth, just like they're doing with ICE, with the immigrants, and instilling fear in people. But once you get the 101st Airborne Division, 82nd Airborne Division, National Guard troops in cities all across the country, then your basis is set for total control. And that's what's going on here. They're setting the basis for martial law. You've got an attack on due process of law, attack on habeas corpus, ways to circumvent that, disobedience of court orders, noncompliance with contempt orders. You've got the Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, that knocked out any kind of contempt proceeding for disobedience of orders with respect to sending those Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador. Well, and Trump learned a valuable lesson there. He realizes he can get away with ignoring court orders because the Federal Courts of Appeals are going to say, we don't want to buck him on a contempt order because he's not going to obey the contempt order, and we don't want a constitutional crisis. Well, you think he hasn't learned his lesson from that? And so once you get all that in place, and let's say you have a big economic emergency, stock market crashes by around 3,000 points, and people are out on the streets, and let's say it's comparable to the Great Depression or even close to it. And then let's say there's some foreign war going on. I guarantee you're going to have a national emergency declared. And what happens at that point where habeas corpus is declared suspended, due process of law is suspended, people are upset, angry, and they start protesting? You got all those troops in the cities ready to go, ready to follow orders. And believe me, they will follow orders, especially in a self-declared emergency. And there you have total control. And so Americans, I think, are going to very likely discover why it was such a huge mistake to have this gigantic national security establishment. This is what our founding fathers warned us against, and I hope it's not true. I hope it doesn't materialize in that case. But the fact that you've got troops being sent into major cities across this country is a very, very bad sign when it comes to a free society. Because, like I said, when you see troops in a city, you're not living in a free society. It's a demonstration, a proof positive that you're not living in a free society. And then the question is, how in the world do you regain a free society after having lost it? That's Trump Watch for this week. Look forward to talking to y'all next week. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you again for your great support of our work. We're very appreciative, and I'll see you next week.